Good evening, everybody, and welcome to those attending, also to viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is the meeting of the Finance and Corporate Services Select Committee, and my name is Councillor John Riley, and I'm the chairman of this meeting. A key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a wide range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. For those in the public gallery, you won't be on camera, but there's not much worry about that this evening because there's nobody in the public gallery. A reminder to councillors and officers and anybody else speaking today that you should turn the microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure that you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. What I'm going to do first of all is to ask everybody to introduce themselves. So I'll start with Councillor Bridges and we'll go around the table.
Councillor Wayne Bridges.
Councillor Kaushik Banerjee.
Councillor Kishan Bhatt.
Andy Goodwin, Head of Strategic Finance.
Marion Finney, Customer Engagement Manager.
Councillor Sansar Puri.
Councillor Narinda Gorg.
Councillor Stuart Mapers.
Anisha Tedji, Democratic Services.
All right, thank you very much. Before we get started with the main agenda, some items of housekeeping, fire alarms. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm does go off, please follow our officer to the fire exits out the building and to the designated meeting point, which is the Civic Centre forecourt. For those in the room, please switch off any mobile devices before the meeting starts or put them on silent. But please note that some councillors may be using tablets or laptops or indeed phones to view the agenda. Residents' feedback forms, you're welcome to give feedback about the meeting. Resident feedback forms are available in the room, but there's also a version online under the broadcast. I probably ought to also say that all items in Part 1 are public, and I don't think we've got any Part 2 items, so we don't need to worry about that. Right, on with the agenda. So, item number 1, apologies for absence.
No apologies.
Excellent, everybody's here. Declarations of interest in matters coming before the committee, apart from the usual. Any? No? All right, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting, which was held, oh my goodness, on the 22nd of November, seems a very long time ago now, of last year. And we dealt with a lot of issues there. Any comments about the minutes? No? All right, thank you. Are they agreed? Thank you very much. Well, I've dealt with item 4 anyway. All right, item 5, Cabinet's budget proposals for the next financial year. Now, it's important to note, of course, as it says in the papers that we have before us, that the issues that we're dealing with, as all the other select committees will be dealing with, are the issues in the budget that pertain to our portfolios and our areas of interest in regard to the areas that we cover in this select committee. But before we do, we've got Andy and Marie here to give us a presentation in regard to these papers. So if you'd like to begin.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the second finance appearance at the Select Committees for the new budget cycle. We'll be presenting the detailed budget proposals within the remit of the committee for discussion and consideration. The feedback from this committee will be included in the budget report, which goes to February Cabinet, where Cabinet will be asked to approve the budget proposals to full Council. So I won't be running through the whole report this evening, but I'll provide some headlines in terms of the Council's in-year monitoring position and set out the context for the Council's approved budget strategy. So for 23-24, the Council reporting a net underspend of £2,000, with the services within the remit of this committee forecast to underspend by £736,000. This is predominantly being driven by a reduction in the Council's energy requirement. That sits within the finance portfolio. Within corporate services, we're reporting £33,000 underspend, with no particular material variances within any of the specific services. Within these services, there are £1.6 million of savings to be delivered in 23-24. 50,000 of this is currently being recorded as Amber 2, which means that work has started on those savings, but we do have some concerns around delivery. That's being linked to the increase in the filming income. The saving is being challenging this year due to the recent strikes in that particular industry. It is expected that eventually that income will be achievable in the medium term. We have a further 215,000 which is being recorded at Amber 1, which again means that work has started to progress, and it's progressed to a further stage where we expect that to be delivered imminently, but perhaps not within the financial year. So this is linked to a new system to manage the complaints and members' inquiries, as well as the review of the printing and postage costs. Moving on to the MTFF, in the consultation budget presented to December Cabinet, the Council's saving requirement up to 28-29 was estimated to be £51 million, with a saving programme of £33.4 million being identified, leaving a residual gap of £17.6 million. The single largest factor for the strategy continues to be the exceptional inflation, adding £48.1 million to the Council's expenditure over the next 5 years. Within the remit of this committee, there's been a significant reduction in the cost of the Council's energy supply costs, with negative inflation of 31% in the forecast for next year. This is accounting for a £2 million reduction in spend in 24-25. Inflationary uplifts from pay award and contract inflation does, however, exceed this value, leaving a net requirement of £6.7 million out of the total £48 million for the Council. This is being driven by £4.7 million for the pay award for services within the remit of this committee, and a further £2 million related to contracted expenditure. Service pressures in total are forecast to grow by £24 million due to demographic growth. Within the remit of this committee, £240,000 relates to the Council's ULEZ charges as a result of our fleets travelling around the borough. Finally, corporate items are adding £14 million to the saving requirement. This is being driven by £7 million of a borrowing requirement to fund the capital programme, and £5 million relating to TfL concessionary fares as travel begins to return to pre-pandemic levels over the medium term. Following the work carried out over the autumn, the consultation budget presented a saving programme of £33.4 million, with £15.8 million of this being required in 24-25. Within the saving programme, £6.8 million fall within the remit of this committee, with £2.9 million of this landing in 24-25. The single largest saving within the remit of this committee relates to the digital strategy, which is expected to deliver savings of £4.2 million over the 5-year budget strategy. There's a further £0.9 million related to the review of the energy use, another £0.9 million relating to bringing in a new financial system, and £0.8 million from a review of legal services, with the remaining savings coming from a number of smaller items. Finally, moving on to capital expenditure, a capital programme budget of £218 million was proposed in December, going up to 28-29, with £26 million of this being within the remit of this committee. The programme items include £11.8 million to fund technology and innovation, so this will help to deliver the £4.2 million saving in the budget strategy, with a further £11 million to fund the Council's transformation projects. Finally, there's been a £2 million investment proposed for a vehicle fleet, as well as £1 million for the Older People's Initiative. Thank you, Chair.
what's clear is that we're still, like a lot of, like all authorities, I suppose, having to contend with an extraordinary amount of external pressures. And in particular, there's still the ongoing effect of the way in which a lot of things have changed since the pandemic. I think you mentioned the issue with regard to TfL, and they're still not up to full capacity in terms of the way in which their revenues are created and obtained, with people changing the way in which they work. But what's clear is that across the board of our service areas, the budget concentrates on efficiency savings, essentially, and looking at how we've done things before and how we continue to do the work and provide services within our remit, or within the remit of the committee. But clearly what the budget is aiming to do is to look at ways of making those services more efficient in terms of how they work, and of particular interest that are set out on pages 15 and 16. There are a number of different areas there which I think in the near future we're going to be needing to look at to see what those types of reviews are all about. Perhaps close to my heart, the review of legal services, to look at how that is operating, and that's how it seems from the description in the report. To look at new ways of dealing with the provision of legal services and so forth. But generally speaking, it's a whole way, especially with, as we've seen so far, the digital strategy and everything that flows from that, in terms of seeking new ways of doing things to a high standard, but nevertheless in a more efficient way. So that's really what's being aimed at, isn't it?
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. With the sort of emphasis on efficiency savings among significant pressures from local authorities, not in London and throughout the UK, I'm just wondering to what extent, when setting out the budget, we consider facilitating collaboration with other local councils, and if there are any joint initiatives or shared funding projects.
Thank you, Councillor. So what we do is, throughout the summer, we look at the budget gap, then we can kind of get a steer on where the value of the savings that we're going to be required. And then throughout the autumn, we carried out what we call MTFS strategy workshops, where the corporate directors are invited to present their proposals as part of the budget. We have quite wide-reaching discussions in those. We get the information from across the organisation, from heads of service, and then at that time we also look at benchmarking data. So we look at what other boroughs are doing, if we think that there's something in there that we could learn from, or maybe there's something they could learn from us. We also have at the moment Grant Thornton in, who are helping us to review the budget and the council's like a zero-based approach, building the budgets from the ground up. So they're bringing with them kind of knowledge of what other boroughs are doing. So it's kind of through those mechanisms and those workshops that we explore all the options available, including insourcing, outsourcing, contracts, hybrids, setups. All of those things get reviewed. With the financial position as it is, kind of no stone unturned at the moment. Thanks.
Of particular interest, obviously, to us, when we look at what's said at paragraph 42 in terms of finance, and references made there to significant transformation in relation to the finance portfolio. Could you sort of expand a little bit on that? Because it looks as if there's going to be, well, clearly are going to be some new systems coming in the way we deal with finance. And of course, if there's change in the finance system itself, then that has a knock-on effect to all other departments, because obviously all of them have an element, an input into how we deal with the money that each one has to deal with. So what's the thinking there?
Thank you, Jay. So I think the underpinning assumptions around the programme of work that's going to be undertaken within the finance area is really around system integration, and it's focusing very much on the back office functions, as you just mentioned, in terms of things working more efficiently. But the key sort of layer, overlaying those system changes, is around how we're managing finance data and the interconnectedness of different sources of finance data, which in turn I think has benefits across the organisation in terms of data-driven decision making, and that obviously has impacts in terms of allocation of resources to better meet resident need.
And is it the case that ever more that local authority finance is looking at how their partners and how their colleagues in the private sector deal with their sort of finance issues? Everyone's had relatively similar pressures because of high inflation in the recent past, and interest rates and cost of living and so forth. Have the two sectors had similar problems to deal with, or have they been able to deal with them in different ways? Is there lessons to be learnt from each side?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think we do see more in the local authority talk about commercialisation, but I still wouldn't put us quite in the same kind of similar box to private sector companies, in that obviously we're very resident driven. We prioritise service delivery. When we're looking at efficiencies, we try to aim efficiencies at the back office side, so that we're maintaining those frontline services that the residents value. I wouldn't like to really answer the question on whether our challenges are the same as the commercial sector, having not really got that much exposure to that side. But in terms of just pure economics, clearly inflation is impacting all of us. Things like the war in Ukraine, Palestine conflict, changing like the energy prices is going to impact on everyone. But how they go about managing that, I'd imagine it's fairly similar to us, but I'm not really cited on that.
It's interesting that you raised that, because some people would sort of ask the question, well, events that happen a long way away, as you say, the war in Ukraine and so forth, the knock-on effect, or what are the knock-on effects, and how do they impact on the sort of thing that we're doing? Or is it more a question of the overall impact that then has that knock-on effect in terms of countries' economies and the way things work in that sort of sense? Because it's often said that events far away do have an effect, and I'm just wondering if there's a fairly easy or simplistic way in which we can explain that.
So I'd like to probably only answer that from a finance perspective. I'm sure there's a lot wider reaching impacts on other areas of services that the council provides. So we've got Ukraine refugees that arrived in this country that the borough has supported, although that has been supported through government funding, so that doesn't come from local taxpayers' council tax. Similarly, we see the impacts on like the asylum seeking service from people migrating up to the country, and then we see on the financial side as well the price impacts. So the war in Ukraine was a big one, so that really impacted the energy market. I don't think we've seen too much of a financial impact from the Palestine conflict, other than perhaps the need to support any refugees, but I've not seen that on the finance side from what I'm seeing. But yeah, I'm sure there's wider service impacts across the borough.
All right, thank you. Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Chair. Genuinely thanks to the officers for the preparations. That these aren't easy things, and the continual monitoring is not easy either, and that is really appreciated. I think part of our role, although we have two departments, as it were, or portfolios that we look at in terms of corporate services and the kind of financial services, is to ensure that we're looking at finance as a whole, as the Cabinet member would in finance, and making sure there's resilience built into the Council through the years. And I'm a little concerned about the lack of wiggle room there is within the budget. I know budgets are always tight, and local authority funding, as recognised in this report, if there isn't a serious investment from governments into local authority, we won't be sustainable, we won't be functional, like many other local authorities, and we've seen that demise with this current government, and as we've called repeatedly for extra funding. I am just a little concerned, particularly, you mentioned the savings that aren't delivered or won't be delivered within this financial year, and I know that will accrue across into other years, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of reserves for where things won't be delivered. So, for example, we have something near 20% across the council of programmes that won't be delivered on time, potentially. And that is a significant amount of money from when we're looking to save 20,000 this year, and next year it would be 20 million, and next year 15 million. So it feels as if we are constantly pushing a little further ahead savings that need to be made in order to balance the budget. So without having extra reserves in place, we are putting ourselves financially at risk in the mid-term financial plan by not having that extra buffer of, well, actually, if we don't achieve this saving on time, there won't be the full amount that we'll lose out on, but there will be a part of. And at the moment, the only mechanism there is for achieving that seems to be managed vacancies to keep us on balance, which for myself leads to two questions. As a technique financially with managed vacancies, are we not compromising the health and well-being of our staff teams who are under-resourced and therefore are struggling, or are we not budgeting properly because we don't actually need those roles? So my first question of many, I suppose, is are we not placing ourselves at more risk by not having a bit of a bigger buffer with our reserves? Our general reserves are the third lowest in London. When you think that Croydon has gone bankrupt effectively and Havering is close or has done the same, that puts us right on the edge and worries me significantly. We've used 6 million of our earmarked, 13 million, of our earmarked reserves. I think I've got that number now, excuse me, but it's a lot of earmarked reserves, 6 million this year. So our overall reserves, whether they are allocated for something like a pressure or general reserves, are very close to the wire. We're only 4 million above the lower range. I also am concerned with the poor decisions made in the past, which means we're now having to contribute through selling off assets, £8 million towards the black hole that was in the Designated Schools grant. We're selling off a lot of assets in order to fund transformation. Transformation does have its benefits. Removing assets that are no longer of need has their benefits. But if you place that in the sense that we have brand new systems coming into place, which we as a committee have reviewed in terms of digitalisation, where we're not quite sure if we have this right yet. So there may need to be a turn of direction with that transformation to accommodate the needs of residents, and not because of any poor planning, but just the nature of transformation projects, which again, if something isn't right, and if I may cite the GOS system, which we use for members' inquiries, that system isn't right. It probably needs some more investment. That money's not built in there, and that was meant to produce a saving. So we could end up spending the money we need to benefit residents' customer experience, their satisfaction with the council, and again losing that saving. And so the managed vacancy approach as a financial mechanism seems it could be quite risky. It seems one that we wouldn't want to sustain over long periods of time, but with the amount of transformation, with the amount of change that's happening to core and cross-cutting initiatives, with the lack of reserves we have, I just wonder how, and I know you will say the risk is balanced, but how there might be ways in which the Cabinet, are there ways in which the Cabinet should be considering building more resilience into this budget? Because at the moment, despite the national narrative, some decisions of the past seem to have placed us into a very unresilient space in a very difficult time.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll try and cover off all those points. If I miss any, please feel free to give me a nudge. One of the things he raised then was the level of reserves. So, as you pointed out, we've got a £26 million, just over 26 million reserves, with the lowest level set in February 23 being 22, so 4 million above. And we are using 6 million of earmarked reserves, as you mentioned. Just around about 5 million of that was budgeted for. So we're seeing a pressure against the reserve balance of about 1 million. So you're right, it does look like we're quite low in terms of the general balances against that minimum level. But there's kind of two different ways you can kind of run your finances. So the approach has been that we do have a low level of reserves, but then we go with a low-risk budget strategy, so that way we're able to mitigate having those lower risks. So as you can see, we've also got some underspends within the position where we have been prudent in setting the budget, and then those areas have delivered a lower expenditure requirement. So one of the key ones within the remit of this committee has been the energy budget, with energy forecast to underspend by 700k this year for the finance portfolio, which most of that is the energy requirement. We also tend to go prudent on our contracted inflation expenditure. We look at the CPI indices across many organisations, and then we look at what is the most prudent way to make sure that the council's financial resilience is kind of protected going into the medium term. So at the moment, the CPI inflation forecast for 23 is 7%, across the average of most of the organisations that are forecasting, and then it's forecast to be 3% next year. But we're budgeting for a 7% increase in the contracted inflation next year, and that's because we tend to see that providers, they approach us and talk about the history. So they're saying last year we saw a 7% increase. So we are trying to be as prudent as possible in the way we set the council's revenue budget next year, so that we can operate with the lower level of reserves. Included in the consultation budget was also an increase in the reserve levels of 1.5 million per annum, taking that up to 7.5 million over the 5 years to build up some of those reserves over the budget strategy life cycle. You talked about transformation and the selling off of assets. I don't think that we're selling assets to fund transformation. I think that we are selling assets that we have deemed as surplus to requirement or no longer suitable for the type of services that we're delivering. And under government directive, we're allowed to fund transformation work from capital receipts. So whilst we're making these disposals, it just makes sense to fund the transformation work from that income stream that's coming in. Digital savings and cost amount. So you talked about the amount of transformation. As you've seen from the budget proposals in December Cabinet, we still have a £17 million budget gap, and there's a £33 million saving programme that's been identified. So clearly, whilst we have the flexibility from government to fund work that delivers that programme, it makes sense to have a good transformation programme that doesn't just go and cut services, but actually goes and does the deep dive reviews, does the kind of zero-based build-up of the budgets to come up with these savings, and then fund those from the transformation work whilst we've got the ability to fund it from that capital receipts income stream. And digital savings, I appreciate you said that sometimes the things change as time goes on. Digital is a very fast-moving area. So we've also been prudent in the capital programme, so where we put the investment within this portfolio into corporate technology, what we've done is instead of financing that over 10, 15, 20 years like we do for much of the capital programme, this is being financed over 5 years, and the savings still, the investment still gets a payback within the budget strategy period. Thank you.
Councillor Moses.
Thank you, Chair. I do appreciate there is prudence within the finance team. There's a lot of skill and ability there in order to make sure that the rates or the budgets are set in a way that aren't over-ambitious in a way that would squeeze the day-to-day activity and expenditure, and Treasury has a big role in that as well in terms of making sure money comes in and out. I think my question would be, how would we fund transformation if we weren't selling off assets? And I do believe that is forcing the hand sometimes of things like closing children's centres, nurseries, relocating libraries or closing libraries to release assets when actually there could have been a need for them if there had been more investment in services as early on. And I'm not saying that I'm against change of services, but I think they have to be what residents ask for as well. So with that, increasing reserves is a sensible move in order to get us closer from that bottom. Do we expect that the range will go up in the next 5 years? And is that part of the logic? I know there's good logic in just building up reserves because we have a lower level, but is that part of the logic as well? And I have two specifics, if I may, Chair, just quickly. One is it speaks in point 45 around, is it 45? No, 49, sorry, around the Hillingdon First card being redesigned to get a 50,000 saving, if I've read that right. Is that the way in which we physically operate it, and so we found a saving through getting a new supplier, etc., or is that a reduction of benefits to residents? And the other one was it talks about £1 million investment in older persons initiatives. I see that there is £1 million roughly that is being used to discount council tax for older people. Is that the same thing, or have I got the wrong end of the stick?
Thank you, Councillor Mathers. I'll start on the point around the Hillingdon First card saving that's factored into the savings programme. So that's very much focused on processes, etc., in delivering that for residents.
Will we put the reserve levels up in February Cabinet? That review is still undertaken, so we always leave that until after the December consultation budget. Provisional settlement obviously gets published after that date, so we need to look at the council's funding because that's an element of the reserve level that we set. So we haven't actually started that review yet, so that will be in February Cabinet. Black and white question on how we'll fund the transformation without capital receipts. It would have to come from revenue expenditure. So I think that's how you'd have to fund it, or you'd have to stop it. But clearly, whilst we've got savings being delivered from that, then it would probably make sense that you would expend it through revenue. Older People Initiative in the capital programme isn't related to the older people discount. It's an investment in just expenditure that could be used to support older people's needs within the borough. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, unless there are any other questions from anyone, that's a very helpful and useful review. Thank you both. We can move on, and thank you very much for the input as far as certainly the paper is concerned. Very comprehensive and easily digestible set of papers for us, and thank you for that. And we'll go on to discuss the response from the committee. We sent around earlier on a proposed response from the committee setting out an acknowledgement of the difficulties that we as local authority inevitably, as others do, face in terms of still very, very complex and substantial financial pressures. I think it's worth noting that, as we know, many of our colleagues up and down the country will find it very difficult to produce balanced budgets for various reasons, and the fact that this authority has been able to, with the combined effort of, in particular, the Cabinet Member for Finance, and also obviously the Office of Finance team, who we, as a committee, I think, thank very much for all the work that you have done and do over the years and over the life of the council. But to have managed to put together such a good balanced budget in the way that it has done is a really big achievement, given all the issues that impact upon local authority financing, not least of which is the maybe a slightly precarious way in which central government fund local authorities, but then that's been in place for many, many, many years. And we acknowledge that and the way in which the budget seeks to make savings and also efficiencies and look to do things better across the board and to deliver services, but in a better and more efficient way. And what's interesting, I think, very much is that there is an ever stronger emphasis on commercialisation, which is interesting. And where we can, of course, there are, people may not know or they may know, but there are relatively a number of restrictions on what local authorities can do in terms of commercialisation. And we've identified quite a number of those which are able to be taken advantage of. And to a large extent, a lot of that is acknowledged in our response. So, and we've set it all out there to go back and be included in the comments. So, if members of the committee agree with the comments, Slemathers.
I'm sure you'd expect a little contrast, Chair, if I may. I think for us it's difficult to agree with the statement. I've no doubt it will go through the majority of the committee who are part of the administration. My concern is that with the things highlighted earlier, a council with higher borrowing and there's extra borrowing being put in, unidentified savings, not achieving costs, cutting services, that this budget doesn't provide and our sections don't provide the resilience that is needed. And my concern is that I agree commercialisation is helpful, but if you look at the downfall that commercialisation has caused other local authorities, although it's a useful tool, I wouldn't want us again using that as a reliance. And the only way we can transform services is, I believe, the sale of assets. And so the struggle I have with this is it's relied on a transformation programme that, through the consequence of cabinet decisions, is continuing to go down a bit of a rabbit hole where we are not resilient enough as a council. So although I respect the efforts that are put in by the cabinet, and I am completely grateful to the officers, I cannot see this as a good achievement. And it is balanced, but I suggest that it's not building resilience within its balance, and the resilience needs to be there and should have been there, but successive decisions haven't enabled that, so we couldn't agree with this statement.
All right, well, the Democratic Service officers noted your comments and they will be in the minutes, but I will ask that this go to a vote. And so, all those in favour... Sorry, did you have something to say before?
Mr. Chairman, I was just merely going to endorse your proposed statement from this committee, but also in doing so, not only note the restraints and the difficulties in this budget. I think the word used earlier was tightening our belts, but also to highlight the fact that some of our money is being used unnecessarily by way of £240,000 going towards Mayor Khan's cash cow that is ULEZ. I'm sure that money could have been better spent in Hillingdon. But there we go. If it's not in that formal statement to Cabinet and Council, I would of course like that minuted, that money could have been better spent.
Thank you. All right. Well, I propose that we put the committee's proposal to a vote. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried. All right, so we can submit that to the in the response, and that will go in the comments in regard to the budget. All right, thank you. So we can move on now to the next item, which is item 6.
Just a moment to set the presentation.
Oh yes, we've got a presentation to come. Excellent. If you want to stay for the presentation, you can. But if you need to get away, I suspect you do. Then thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So for anyone watching, this is Marion Finney doing a presentation for us in relation to a topic that we picked up previously, which is a review of the Council's consultation arrangements. Maybe we need the lights dimming or off or something so we can see it properly. I don't know if Councillor Mathers can see properly from that side. Oh, you've got one behind. Oh, yeah.
If I get older, if I can see anything from a distance.
I'm in your way, am I?
No, it's my eyes.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. There we go. That's better. A little better, anyway. So, Marion. Yes. You need to press your... There's a button there to press.
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Well, following the motion passed at Cabinet and the update from the Select Committee held in October last year, a set of terms of reference emerged with possible lines of inquiry. Tonight I will be presenting for discussion some information to enable us better understand or to give us better understanding of how the Council engage with residents and provide some examples of data trends and a key comparison of resident consultation in similar settings. So if we look at the terms of reference for review, the slide indicates to investigate the Council's consultation arrangements, as requested by the Council motion, and we had this initial discussion in the Select Committee in October, to review how the voices of our diverse communities are heard, working towards geographical parity, to make any necessary recommendations to Cabinet based on the Committee's finding. And alongside that is a possible lines of inquiry, and there was an interest in you wanting to know how does the Council compare with other similar boroughs on response rates, analysis of key universal consultations to understand the overall response rate. So that would include demographics, sex, of who responds. Innovative approaches of universal consultations that the Council and other public bodies have conducted. So, before I go on to comparison, I would first like to go through what it means when we as a team, the customer engagement team, is approached for any support with any engagement activity or consultation. So on the intranet, on our intranet page, there is a bit there for customer engagement. There's a page there, and onto that page you have the customer engagement SharePoint. If I could just click on that. And what that does is it takes you to the customer engagement web page, where you have information around how teams and officers can be supported to conduct consultation. So within this, we have see what that one would look like. Okay. But within it, we have options for engagement, when someone approaches you, you talk about, this is something that I presented in October, where we talk about, you know, what needs to happen, how do we analyze data in a timely fashion, what provisions would be made for it, has the actual consultation gone through cabinet approval, is it a statutory consultation, is it not a statutory consultation, what sort of support managers or services will need. And for that, we also devised the form. I don't know why it's not going through. We also devised the form for managers or services, sorry about that, where they can have a look at, we can have a look at, you know, who's asking. I remember the last time we had a conversation, we talked about how do we pull together consultations across services. So what we've done, we've devised the form to be able to pull some of this information together. So we'll ask who wants this consultation to happen, the team, the directorate, the contact details, whether, like I said, whether it's a statutory consultation, has it received sign-off from cabinet, if it has, what's your proposed start and end date, the background paper to the consultation. That's to help the team better understand what the service is trying to achieve. So once that is done, we work alongside the comms team. I'll go back to the main presentation. Yes. So once that is done, once that information is done, we bear in mind we want to thrive for engagement, trying for it to be accessible, for it to be visually accessible, hearing accessible, physical accessibility, and learning disabilities. We also want to bear in mind of that support. We'll ask ourselves the question: what does good engagement look like? It has to be meaningful. It has to offer residents a platform to make or influence decisions. We also want the consultation to have a fair representation. We want to exude honesty, where areas where residents can make a change and where they can't make a change. I think that's very important. And in order to develop that positive experience within engagement, we need to know what engagement looks like. So, having said that, how do we ensure that efforts are made to reach a wider audience? We talked about geographical parity, ethnicity, etc. So these are some of the ways that we engage with our residents to ensure that we reach those hard-to-reach or hidden communities within the borough. So we do face-to-face meetings, virtual meetings, surveys, hybrid sessions. Right at the corner there, that was our first try at a virtual session where we had residents online and we had some people in the room at the same time. We also, that's another photo from the assembly. We engaged with community faith leaders. That's somebody within our team that was offering translation during an engagement facility. So we have that in-house provision when needed for that particular language. And this is us working in partnership with the fire brigade around safety. So we use our social media platforms. We engage with our community faith leaders. We work with residents associations, forums, etc. Now, before we get into data, I would first of all like us to look at what the Hillingdon census tells us, because when we do want to compare how we fare on in terms of response rate, we want to bear in mind what the borough's population looks like, broken down into those key demographics. So, the total borough population is 305,900, and I have focused on the 18 plus because they're most likely to fill out surveys and engage with us on that level. So, for that, 76.7% of the Hillingdon's population is what we have looking at trying to engage. So we look at ethnicity. There's always been that trend, and it's evidenced within this census that 51.8% of our population is white, and following from that is Asian background with 32%. Within disability, within the Act itself, we have 14% that are registered disabled within the Act, within the criteria for the Act. We then move on to look at the split between gender. The top two are male and female, and that would be 51.2% female and 48.8% male. We look at religion. How do we engage with our faith leaders, and what do we get out of it when we do engage, and how do we reach into those hidden communities? From the census, our highest representation is from the Christian faith, with 41.4%. And the second highest is people that have not just, either they've preferred not to say, or have no religion at all, and that's 19.4%. The third highest from there, or leading on from there, is the Muslim community, which 12.1%. Then we move on to age range as a proportion of those aged 18 and over. Our highest within the census was recorded as age range 35 to 54, and that's 51.8%. Following on from that, we have age range 65 plus, which is 17.6%. So if we bear that in mind as we go into the data trend. Now, what I've done is, I had my colleague here talking about the budget consultation, and that's exactly what I looked at in terms of comparing our data trend. So I've looked over the period of, I've gone back 3 consultations, 3 years back, how we've engaged with residents, and I've sort of highlighted the key areas that was discussed at the last committee meeting in October. There was questions around male, female, age with the ethnic minority or ethnic population. Now, in 2021, you'll see from the data that we had a very low response of 33, but then that changed in the following year, 115, and then in last year was 611. That's because we're trying to push hard. We're making changes to how we engage. And with the budget consultation, I must say that it has to be it has to be of people's interest to engage in responding to budget consultation. Now, like I said, if you look at the respondents, you would find out that the highest respondents for the last 2 years has been male, maybe because they tend to run the house. They're more interested in how money goes out. So they've been our highest respondents, male. And responses have come from, there is a pattern there. HA4 has always been consistent in engaging in any form of consultation that we put out. But then you have UB8 and UB10, and then we do have UB7 and UB3. So again, it all depends on at that time what people's interests are. In terms of the percentage of residents who respond, it's always been mainly residents that respond as opposed to businesses. You can see that the percentages for businesses are really low. And when we look at the age range, yet again, we have a common range where you have 65 plus or 55 to 64. And interestingly, last year we had more responses from 35 to 44. So we might be looking at something new moving forward. We'll wait and see what this budget consultation gives us at the end. So this is what the data tells us in terms of key elements around trend. Now, I've put on there some examples of some of the borough-wide other borough-wide consultations that we have conducted and how responses have come through to us. So the library service consultation, again, you could see on there that majority of the people that responded at that time were female. In terms of age range, again, it was 65 plus. Maybe because, you know, they have leisure time, they go to the library more, or they use the library more. Followed by 34 to 44, which again is in line with what the Hillingdon census is telling us. Talking about geographical parity, you know, there was a question in there about postcode location, people that responded to the budget consultation. Again, we had HA4 as the most responsive postcode, and following that, we have, following HA4, we have UB10. So again, it all depends on where the interest lies within the consultation. Then we picked up on sexual orientation. The most responses from there is straight heterosexual, followed by prefer not to say. And this is a common trend that we're seeing now as we do budget consultations. People prefer not to state, even with disability. People, you know, that's a high number that we see here, where people now just are not bothered about giving that data to us. But we'll keep asking. Now, another example was ULEZ. I know Councillor mentioned that in his talk. Again, this was our highest response consultation so far, and that just goes to show that people would only respond where their interest lies. This consultation received over 11,000 responses in the borough, and UB10 was our highest respondent. That's where our highest responses came from, followed by HA4 again, and then UB7, again in line with the Hillingdon's census. We look at the reason why they participated in the ULEZ consultation. Clearly, it's because people, the difference between those that have ULEZ compliance cards and those that don't, according to this data that we gathered, was just over 1,000. But people felt really passionate about it. So even though some of them had compliant cards, they participated in the actual survey. And you could tell, for people that answered no, you could tell that they were not eligible for the scheme. So that was something that was of a burning nature, and hence the responses that we received. Okay, so again, within the consultation, it goes to tell us again that highest respondents within ethnicity was white, followed by Asian, again, in line with the Council's census data. Religion, again, that was Christianity, followed by Indian, and then prefer not to say. Same pattern there. Again, within the ULEZ consultation, We had over 9,000 residents that participated in that. And then we had the highest response from businesses in any consultation that I've ever conducted. So that was something that really meant something to them, and probably how it affects their business. So now we look at comparing data. Again, I chose the budget consultation. We're going to compare data within our neighbouring boroughs. So the data that was readily available was from Harrow and Brent. Ealing and Onslow did not undertake a public consultation last year around this. So the data on here tells you that actually Hillingdon had the highest responses from both boroughs. We had 611 responses compared to our counterparts with 230 and 101. And we do have, I must say, especially with Brent and us, have similar composition in terms of population, followed by Harrow. But it tells you, again, male respondents were, we had most response from male, and that was the same from Harrow and Brent. In terms of age range, we find ourselves in the same category with our counterparts, our neighbouring boroughs, 45 to 64, 51 to 60. It's just similar to what Hillingdon is experiencing at the moment in terms of responses to consultation. So once that comparison is done, we look at maybe recommendations and ideas for the future. So these are some of the things that we, as a team, have come up with that would help strengthen our engagement as a whole with residents. And this does take a collective approach. So we look at widening participation, a widening provision for hard-to-reach communities. Now, these hard-to-reach communities can either be these hard-to-reach communities are what we call hidden communities as well. It could be due to language barrier. We had a conversation around this in October. It could be maybe parents with young children. It could be maybe youth engagement, which is one of the recommendations on there, or ideas on there. And then also what I found out from other counterparts across the boroughs, incentives were deemed necessary. If residents are going to add value to what the council does, then maybe we might want to consider a way of recognizing their efforts. This doesn't have to be monetary, but it could be through vouchers. We could have a raffle draw for something like budget consultation to encourage participation. Other boroughs do it, where they have like a £50 or £100 voucher, and that just drives responses, response traffic. We also want to look at increasing partnership working, which is something ongoing. That's what we always do, and it would always stay on the agenda in terms of improving participation. We look at budget, increase in budget. I've just heard about financial pressures, and we do take that on board, but sometimes there is a challenge when you do want to conduct a consultation or engagement activity and there's not much budget to throw to support the initiative or that activity. So that's something, bear in mind the financial pressures, but that's something that we need to look at in terms of increasing participation. Increasing youth engagement, that's a challenge for us across the board, not just with us, but our counterparts across London. And we have all these different provisions. Earlier on this week, I attended a meeting with all the partners and across council services, people that deliver services to young adults and youth. And we had a meeting about how we would drive engagement and participation. And we're even looking at probably holding something like a youth assembly, like we do with disability assembly, or we do with older people's assembly. Maybe we want to trial youth assembly. So these are things that are on the table to increase participation and engagement. Then there is also shared engagement activity log. So this is something that I recently put together with the team. Bear in mind the conversation we had in October about bringing all our engagement activities together across the council. It's also to support the work that councillors do. I know we had a conversation about when you do go out, you could promote what's happening within the council. Maybe we're trialing this at the moment to see how we could gather data in one place and be able to share with members or other officers. At the same time, just strengthening partnership working across the service, and also maybe ease financial budget pressures where people can team up to do things. Maybe a department wants to go out and ask questions where somebody else is doing something similar. You could put your question into that survey, and you just go through with one survey as opposed to running 2 surveys. So with this, what this would do is tell you how much engagement activities goes on across the directorate, the teams, what type of engagement activity it is, how it's done, whether it's online, face-to-face, estate-based, virtual, and who the leads are, who's your audience for it, and the frequency of it. So, last but not the least, increase engagement with councillors, or councillors engaging and getting themselves involved with what we do within the council, work more closely together, maybe look up on the customer engagement web link to see how we can support with some of the engagement activities you do out in your local wards. We're very much open to support with that. And at the same time, for councillors to approach us with some of the problems they have when they go out into the community, because if you don't come up to us, we would never know that problem exists within that community. So I would really want to extend that branch for us to work more closely together with councillors in terms of improve and increase engagement with residents. With all being said through the presentation, I would also just like to say we're all a team within the council working together for the common good, and teamwork makes the dream work. So it's all hands on deck. We all have to come together to make it happen. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for that. Do you want to turn your... All right, thanks. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. It was very informative in many ways. I think that, I suppose the first question really is about what's obvious is that you do a great deal, and that we do a great deal. So, in a sense, my question almost to Councillor Mathers to perhaps clarify is that when this motion came before the council and it queried the engagement with diverse communities and perhaps, in your terms, hard to reach communities, I must confess I did sort of wonder exactly what was meant by that, and what, if anything, was in fact going wrong, because what you've shown us tonight is a great deal of engagement and a great deal of effort to engage. And yes, there are things that no doubt members of the committee will ask you about, but I think it would be fair to you for there to be a bit more clarity around what it is thought that there is missing. Because without doubt there will be some communities that don't engage or
I mean, for example, if you were to go onto the website, I mean, first of all, can you go onto the web? Can a person go onto the website? Are they happy to go onto the website? Can they negotiate their way around it? Once they can, do they find what they're looking for? Is it easy to find out what's being consulted on? Is it easy to work out what you're interested in? And all those sorts of things. They're okay for the sorts of people who are used to consulting, or are used to speaking up, or are used to having a say, aren't they? But I suppose people who are not as used to that as others are may feel more reticent in coming forward. So I suppose, in a sense, if I get what the original motion and the original intention was, and again I'll hear from Councillor Mathers and others, it's almost a step before all of this. It's being able to reach out to all our communities and effectively say, well, it's kind of a two-way thing. You can come to us to ask for things and to talk about things and to even ask about how you ask. But similarly, it's a question of, do we have enough avenues of reach in order to get to everybody? Those are just some thoughts, really. Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Chair. Helpful thoughts. I think the spirit of what Councillor Corr's motion and the Labour Group's motion was about was, we saw in a number of those surveys there were one or two postcodes that were specifically engaged. Now, we don't want necessarily to bring them down to where others less engaged areas are, but raise the borough across the board. And I know there's lots of work going on. I really commended some of the ideas there, particularly around surveys after people have engaged with services. Now, that's slightly different from the consultations we tend to look at, which are policy-based. That seems to be more kind of interactions with the council. And we repeatedly, that sounds terrible, regularly have customer service managers in to talk about, the compliments, the complaints, and we that's part of our role, is to scrutinise, where that. I think some of those things are very helpfully resolved informally, but there are sometimes things that are beyond our vision of understanding in terms of council operations, because that's just how it's always been, where there'll be one or two residents who have the best bit of feedback that would stop us getting to that place of complaint before we even resolve it informally. So I really would encourage, and maybe that could be part of what we're doing around the engagement with services, where we can get feedback in from residents once they've engaged with the service, even ones where the engagement might be a little bit more statutory, so it might be a bit more sticky, but get their views in how that is shaped. I think that would be a great way forward. How you then springboard that to those policy areas. Budget is a policy thing more than anything else, and you spoke about surveys where there was more interest. I'm not quite sure the answer. I know your team has many ideas, but for the Labour Group, it was around how do we ensure that the whole borough's voice is heard, and that we move away from some more geographical heavy responses to try and even them out a bit. And there has been some great success. I remember, I think it was the year with the 601, so it was last year's budget, raising the previous year that we'd only had 40 responses by the point of the first, that was a question earlier in, and they built steadily, and then there was obviously a concerted effort to improve that for the budget the following year. So where there's a will, there's a way in terms of the politics of it, but I think it's how do we resource a team so they can consistently go, well, why is there just one area of the borough that doesn't engage? And although that may be common in similar either demographical terms or just generally might be just a historic thing, not accepting it, and I don't think your team does, but we all need to have an effort, and you were talking about councillors engaging, but not accepting that as the norm, but going beyond that and saying, well, actually we do need to hear this area's voice, because borough-wide policies affect everybody in the borough. So yes, I think for me it was just about understanding what's being thought about being done differently, what's being done differently, what has been done differently recently, in order to get us towards that end goal, which is I don't think parity will happen in one or two consultations time. I think we're looking at a long-term kind of, it's activating residents while at the same time it can get accessible to residents and trying different things with residents. So I think it's a longer-term journey, but that was the basis of the the motion was, how do you encourage everywhere and everyone in areas particularly that are underrepresented in terms of resident voice?
I think inevitably, and certainly looking at the geographical references, without any question, there are areas of the borough where there are people where there are people there who are and have been historically used to engaging with, whether it's the council or their MP or anybody, because they know how to engage, and they know they can, and they feel that they can, and they want to. I think the challenge is as Councillor Mather says, not to stop them or bring them down, but to bring everybody else up if they want to an extent. Now, I suppose it is a two-way process to a degree, but in order to get the awareness, I mean, some people, and I've met some folks, don't really understand what the relationship is between residents and the council in terms of what does the council do, what things happen to me, and what things can I do that the council provide. They may not actually know how the whole thing works and what their relationship is, and then in some other parts of the borough they know exactly how it works, and they can pick the phone up or they go on the website or whatever because it's just inbuilt. They know how things work. So, as I say, I think maybe, because we've got to make recommendations, and because this motion came from council, I don't know about what anybody else feels, but I think it would be quite good to have a brief report back to council, they having very happily given it to us to look at, just a relatively short report with some recommendations or some observations based on what you've said today, saying, well, look, we've looked into this, acknowledging that you're doing an enormous amount anyway, acknowledging that actually we do get for the right types of things that people are interested in. And that's another thing, of course. I think the other thing is an aspect of simplicity. Perhaps, Councillor Bridges, you can expand on that.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Marion, for your presentation. It was very informative. I don't have questions as such, but I do have a number of observations. And when I discussed this before the meeting with Councillor Riley, one of my own thoughts was that sometimes the consultations, when we look at the documents themselves, they're too wordy, they're too long. And if you're trying to reach to average Hillingdon, mum and dad putting the kids to bed, wanting to settle down for night, watch telly, they don't really want to fill out pages of consultation forms. And I almost feel that you need to have two versions. If you want someone to go in depth, then by all means let's keep the current process. But if you just want a quick answer, just a very few short questions, 4 or 5 points, tick yes or no, something they can do in less than a minute, I think would appeal to a lot of people. That was one of my own thoughts on that. In regards to other points, I think we can be doing more on social media. I see a lot of posts on Facebook from the council. I don't see a lot of engagement with the comments that come onto those Facebook posts. There are a number of comments constantly from residents on various issues, if it be complaints or even compliments. I've seen compliments as well. But I've never seen any engagement from those comments to say, why don't you give us a bit more information or feedback by clicking on this link to our consultation on either the budget or libraries or whatever it may be. So that was my second point. Your slide about engagement with councillors, I think, is vital. I don't think officers do enough of that. I think it would be far more easy and cost effective, I might add, to just give councillors that access, those links that they can share with their contacts in local communities, whether that's via email or just in response to MEs. It would be very helpful to me as a ward councillor if I had those links straight to hand, which I could share on my social media pages or even share to local residents associations as well. We also have a youth council which has had no mention at all throughout any of this process, and I'm pretty sure with the demographics that councillors have raised concerns about, those difficult to reach areas, that would surely be one of the first point of calls, is to engage with them and see how they can reach out to those demographics, because they are on the same wavelength of those age groups, which by chance they probably have more greater influence than we possibly could, as someone in much older, some older than others, demographics and age groups. And also the use of our facilities, our libraries have a great range of technology by way of PCs. Surely there's some improvements we can make there when people log on and use our systems, that we have that pop up when they log on to say, would you mind taking a minute or two to fill out this consultation? And also perhaps we could get around the language difficulties if people are using those PCs, that they could select the language of their choice, which would hopefully reach out to those people that we find difficult to reach. And also a bit more improvement on YouTube. We have, for example, this meeting being filmed this evening. I very rarely see in my time chairing resident services and indeed POCs before it, those orange feedback forms that are left at the back of the room gathering dust. I never see them filled out, very rarely at all, and I'm actually quite pleased there's two gentlemen in the audience this evening. I think that's the first time I've seen any attendees for a number of years. But improving those links on social media like YouTube, where I do see on the viewing figures we've had 100 or 200 people sometimes view full council, having that link more accessible, or just having a pop-up at the end of the filming to say, can you just take a minute to give some feedback? Just making it easier to engage would be a starting point, I think, and those are my thoughts on the matter.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I definitely concur with my colleague, Councillor Bridges, on a lot of the points he's made, especially on social media. Just an observation, just to add to what he was saying. I think there's also a really good app called Nextdoor. And a lot of people on Nextdoor, especially in my ward, raise concerns or issues, and it's a great platform for me to see the kind of issues and concerns they're raising. And I think these kind of apps are also becoming quite prevalent, and I think it's important that council also engage with those kind of applications.
Councillor Garth.
One thing I was going to suggest, and apologies if you've suggested it already, but Hillingdon People is something that goes out to everyone, and at the moment it's in a paper format, so with people that maybe do not have access to computers, etc., I think it would be worth publicising your consultations in there, and perhaps maybe in a few different languages. You've already identified what the main respondents are, so I think that's a pretty good way of publicising it as well.
Sorry, just say that again.
In Hillingdon People, so if there's a consultation going on, you could perhaps put it in different languages, because not everyone has access to, like a computer, etc. So, and that goes out to the whole borough, I believe. So,
and maybe also, I'll call on Councillor Mayers in a minute. I know it's a bit of a touchy subject, but people do look at the notice boards, at community notice boards, and if they're well maintained, I don't say massive amounts of material, because you don't want that, but something punchy, and perhaps some form of reusable poster. I don't even know what that is, but I mean, I've just suddenly thought about it. But I mean, some sort of thing that says, we're consulting on this, look at this. I think Councillor Bridges is right about libraries, because they are used, and people are using them in different ways, even if they just use them to go to as a group. I like the idea of pop-up things, that when you log on, immediately something comes up with a list maybe of consultations or issues that you're promoting. Because apart from anything else, if you're doing all this work, you want good responses. And if you can encourage that by virtue of information, that would be another way. Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Chair. I too am a fan of those, not always the pop-ups, but the ones that, particularly at the end of an engagement on an Autobot, you can just say, how did we do? Or text messages that come afterwards from whatever company, and you just press 1, 2, yes, no. Love those all day long. And it is obviously more difficult with things that are more complicated. And that's where, for me, I think we can see real success in the Older People's Assembly. where there is a significant number of people from across the borough of that demographic who have the opportunity to hear and talk about council services and engage with there. And I'm always a fan of, the Youth Council's a great example of young people. There's also the Youth Parliament stuff where there's a couple of representatives who always, champion Hillingdon in those settings nationally. Anywhere where schools or youth services or others can engage young people on behalf of the council, I think that's a win-win. Something I used to do in a previous role elsewhere was to help a council engage with young people on certain issues. Even if sometimes councillors don't always want to hear those very blunt responses, it actually shows you the thoughts of younger generations who are about to vote or don't vote and have services that they rely on from the local authority. The Assemblies one is an interesting one for me, because I think sometimes we were talking about interest when someone's interested. I think sometimes we miss Assemblies around demographics are great, but sometimes we miss ones around themes. So I know that in a previous motion around environment, it was talking about like a climate change assembly, which may have sounded more contentious than it needed to be. Bringing people together with common interests so they can discuss things, and then maybe feel able to then bring others to that forum. Okay, you will always get those who have a very loud voice, but I think it opens another opportunity where someone might go, well, I don't want to necessarily be identified as a certain type of person, but a person who's involved in a certain type of activity or has a certain type of interest I'm more interested in. So whether there's the opportunity to explore that around themes for a period of time or on a rolling programme may also be helpful. I know roadshows have often worked well, and they work extremely well for the NHS. GP surgeries repeatedly now give out text messages saying we have a health roadshow happening in X part of the PCNs do it in X part of the borough. The council can tag on to that, in my mind, because we're good allies with local health partners. But also our own roadshows. If people are frustrated because they couldn't get through to a council service, nothing motivates them more from getting a text message or hearing that there is a chance to engage with that service at a roadshow in a local community hall or other space. I hope that's helpful.
If I may, just on a couple of points that have been raised. We do put things out in Hillingdon people, and when we do consultation, rather than translating the document into various languages, we have a script that we attach to the consultation, which simply says, if you require more information, please contact. So then we have a customer engagement number on there. So what that does is, they would call us. That is done in different languages, by the way. So that's done. We have Somali, Urdu, about 8 languages. So it's just a PDF document that says, if you would like more information or assistance with this consultation or this document, please contact. When people call us up to say we'll need help with that, then we go through to the council supplier Big Word. The council provides translation and interpretation services, or we have somebody within the council that can have a conversation with those people to assist them in encouraging them to participate and have a say in whatever consultation or engagement activity that goes on. So that is already covered in that sense. We also have other outlets that we do send information to that cascade that to wider audiences. There are people out there that have different groups with 2,000 or 3,000 members, and we send that through to them, and they would send it out, like we've done for budget consultation as well. There was also a mention about the Youth Council. We cannot possibly have youth engagement without the involvement of the Youth Council. So that was also something that was discussed at the meeting, and that was the first time I had attended that meeting. We're trying to pull something together. It's a new initiative, and we're trying to figure out how we do it. So we have our colleagues from NHS, from SEND, Adult Social Care, Youth even project search from within the council. So it was a fair representation, and everyone's sort of excited about what we can possibly do with this to drive engagement for not just youth, but people with limited abilities alongside us doing that engagement. In terms of social media engagement and pop-ups on websites, or engaging with our current website, that would be for our comms team. So that's not something that the customer engagement will do, because it's more of a technical side. So that would rest with our colleagues that we work with within the comms team. So we do welcome the comments, and we will surely pass on those comments to them. In terms of themes for assemblies, what we do with the assemblies that we have now, which does work well, it's a platform for people to come together, discuss and engage. So the agenda items are actually created and suggested by the residents. So we may have things that we want to talk to them about. We'll put that on the agenda, but they're the ones that shape what we deliver to them. So we have like steering groups that sit behind those assemblies, and they come together and look at what's important to them. And then we do priorities for the year. Give us your top 5. What do you want us to look at? We'll have a session, they'll tell us, and then we as officers go away and make that happen. So we then look for organizations or services that could come and talk to them about their own their interests. So we're already exploring and working in that way also. We do transactional surveys. Not just us, I work with my counterparts across the council to do transactional surveys. I know you mentioned, Councillor, something about once the service is delivered, we do that. We do that within repairs service. We do that, my colleagues on the call within the send service. What I work with people to do is to look at the journey of what they do and look for ways where we could have those transactional surveys embedded into the service that they deliver, so we don't have to do major surveys at the end of the year or every 6 months. If we do transactional surveys, we can then improve services as we go along, because sometimes you pick up a trend in the first quarter of the year, and that would help you change your services for the next quarter or the following quarter. So some of the things are already on the table, being discussed, happening. I think one thing that we know that really will need support with is just how we pull it all together, how we let our services come together with one voice and say, this is where we're going with this. Everybody needs to participate, and that will just make everyone's life easy, not just for work, but also for the residents.
I think that one thing you said there, press your button. One thing you said there about social media, I mean, Councillor Bridges' point about it was really very important, and the fact that you, and I'm not criticising at all, and I understand how things have to be sort of divvied up, but I think because you've got the expertise in the promotion and acquisition of getting messages out there and of surveys and of trying to create engagement and so forth, having to say to yourself, well, I can't do this because that's comms, it's not my area, I think is a hindrance for you, because surely social media, because of the fact that people use it so much and rely on it so much, almost like I don't know, what can I say, a sort of virtual library type of thing, in my mind, it needs to be something that you can take hold of, because what's it called? Is it next door neighbourhood, something like that? Yeah. I mean, when I look at those, I mean, there's loads of people on there, and it may not be every time these hard to reach folk, but nevertheless, at some stage, it will. By word of mouth, if nothing else, I suspect, especially in relation to families and people, if they still pick their kids up from school, seeing each other at the school and that sort of thing. it gets around. So I would be concerned to think that you couldn't take advantage of the whole social media spectrum in order to help do your work. And I think the other thing is, and I'll finish on this because I know it's getting late, the idea of engaging the older age groups in schools. Many years ago, when I was at school, and I don't know if they still do it, but we used to have assemblies where things about the local community were told to us. Things that were coming up and stuff that was happening. Did we want to get involved in this? All sorts of stuff was happening. And all right, we were, it was a rural area, and that was probably one of the few ways of getting messages out to people. But getting through, most of the older schools will have, or the schools catering for older children will have some sort of school council or some sort of assembly or something like that. If we were able to, in a completely non-political way, just a council being a civic body way, have an input to those and say, even if you can't respond to a consultation, this is the stuff we're doing. If you're interested, talk to us, or we'll send someone to come and talk to you. I mean, it should, in a sense, it should be stuff that councillors are doing as well, just kind of rolling the engagement. But I think that if you were able to, and I know it's difficult because of the way schools have developed and we don't have the grip on them that we used to, but even so, if we can if we can get into the older age groups, the sixth form end of schools, just to let them know what we're doing or what you're doing, and also that may then get home by virtue of them nagging their parents about something or other, So there's a variety of ways. But look, we've got to make recommendations. I think it's a good... Sorry, Councillor Bridges.
I just had two other points, if I may, Chairman.
Yeah.
One of the improvements I think we can make, which I would assume is cost neutral, is actually making a very quick improvement to my account. There were thousands of Hillingdon residents signed up to my account, and actually having a live consultation tab of any live current consultations which they can click on would be an easy solution. That might even be a recommendation, perhaps. And secondly, which I think is probably a very important point, is I feel we're not so good at the feedback from our end, and there may be a degree of apathy because they feel, well, I'm going to fill in a consultation, but nothing's going to be done about it. And it would be good for the council to be doing a bit more of you said we did, and actually highlighting what we've done as a result of the consultation, as a result of feedback from residents that's made us stop and think, actually, we could do this a little bit better. And as a result of your comments, this is what we did.
So with regards to my account, the conversation is ongoing. I am part of the team that are looking at how we could better improve our engagement with my account. The drive at the moment is getting people to sign up for my account, and by doing so, at a click, we're able to communicate with them. So that is on the table in terms of, and even the transformation teams are looking into how we can enhance improvement at the moment. So that's on the cards. I may not have come across clearly when I said in terms of the comms team. What I meant was not that we can't do it, because it's a technical thing that's outside our own remit. So it would be the comms team that would look at anything to do with websites. But in terms of the functionality and how we engage with it, I totally agree, and that is something that we are looking at. That is something on the cards. It's all about just improving engagement via the website. You spoke about going in, having pop-ups. I agree with you. Like we have on the intranet, when you go in, you have the rollings at the front. I agree. We've had discussions, but I believe the challenges around our current system and what can and can't be done. In terms of next door, I'm sure my colleagues from comms will have a conversation and see how our current systems can link into. So it might not be setting up an account for that, but maybe just see how we can divert traffic or in picking up points and discussions and ideas from that from next door. Thank you.
Okay, final comment, Councillor Banerjee.
Thank you, Chairman. So very quickly from me, something that I did actually notice during the report is that you collect demographic data with regards to like religion. Based on what Councillor Riley said in terms of engagement of people, is there any scope or anything we've done in the past to maybe engage with community organisations and just try and target those demographics where we have historically received poor responses? Just an idea more than anything else. Thank you, Chairman.
My colleague and I, Fiona, who works with Prevent, we communicate with, we liaise with faith leaders across the borough, where you have all the different denominations on it. So we have our hands in that as well. When it comes to that, we do. Engagement can be challenging, but again, the bottom line is for us to create that platform for easy accessibility, encouraging the residents to participate. But at the end of the day, it's always down to them to take up that opportunity and engage. And they would always do that in areas that they're interested in. Thank you.
All right, look, I'm going to draw this to a close, otherwise we'll end up being as long as the Pensions Committee, and that was very, very long. Look, thank you so much for that. It's a really fascinating topic. What we'll do is, outside the formal committee, if I can ask everybody to email me with ideas for recommendations to full council. I know that Anisha will do a brief report. It doesn't have to be massively long, but some recommendations so that we can go back to council and say, look, we've looked at this. These are the directions of travel. This is what we need to do. But equally, I think it's probably just as much something that we as councillors need to get involved in. We all have surgeries, we all have access to our residents, so encouragement even before you get to consultation, I think, is part and parcel of the equation. But Marion, thank you very much indeed for all of that. Really helpful, thank you. And we will definitely, obviously, follow it up and get your views on a short report and some recommendations. But if everyone can email me with ideas for recommendations, that'd be great. I've taken some notes, but a nudge reminder would be very grateful. All right, thank you. Item 7, forward plan, just a note really. You've all seen that. I'm not going to go over it. Everyone's got a copy. Work programme that's set out. I think we'll look at this in more detail next time, but we need to have a look at a couple of major topics. So we need to talk about those in the February meeting. Anything else? Okay, unless there's any other comments or any other issues, I will close the meeting. Thank you very much.